the ongoing attacks against any and all infrastructure that exists to help Palestinian people, especially aid infrastructure. And to talk more about this, we are very, very honored to be joined by Mark Kronenfeld, who's the executive director of the United Nations Relief and Works Agency USA National Committee, UNRWA USA National Committee. Thanks so much for joining us, Ms. Kronenfeld.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me today.
Well, it's an honor to have you with us and wish it was in better circumstances. And I wanted to start with what I think has shocked many people around the world, and that was the destruction of the UNRWA headquarters in East Jerusalem in the West Bank. I mean, it seems that even in the wake of the so-called ceasefire, I don't even know if we can call it that, that the policy of Israel is just to do everything they can to make life for Palestinian people unbearable.
Yeah, I mean, you all were just talking about might making right, essentially, and unilateralism. This is exactly that on steroids. On January 20th, it was really a dark day for international law. This is when Israel, a member of the United Nations, a UN member state, invaded a UN premise in full defiance of international law, essentially ripping up all diplomatic conventions heretofore and demolishing a United Nations property. And I think this is indeed an attempt really to, among many attempts to, as you say, limit the humanitarian aid, the support that can go to Palestinians in Gaza, and make good on threats that we've seen from the highest levels of Israeli government about ethnic cleansing and population transfer. And I just want to say what happens today, what happened, on January 20th to UNRWA could happen tomorrow to any international organization or diplomatic mission, whether in the occupied Palestinian territory or anywhere in the world. This sets a very, very dangerous precedent, and I hope all member states will react and be clear in their statement that this is absolutely wrong and against all international law.
I wanted to ask you, when it comes to attacking UNRWA, this has been ongoing, right? The Israeli officials have been claiming that UNRWA is illegitimate, that it should be dismantled altogether. They've been physically attacking it across Gaza and now in the West Bank. What's the real objective behind targeting UNRWA's infrastructure and credibility, and how does that fit into the broader Israeli strategy towards Palestinians, specifically Palestinian refugees?
Oh, absolutely. I think that for many years, Israel kind of made peace with the fact that UNRWA was working and essentially a de facto Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education in Gaza, because they didn't want to do that work themselves of essentially caring for the humanitarian needs of this population. And mind you, UNRWA was developed with essentially planned obsolescence in mind. The idea was that once there was a just and durable political solution to the plight of Palestine refugees, then UNRWA wouldn't be needed. But that political solution had to be by the political parties themselves. The UN has never been mandated, or UNRWA has never been mandated for that. So we saw, though, ramped up and around the first Trump administration under Jared Kushner, we saw an increasing demonization of UNRWA, first with all sorts of mythology around UNRWA's textbooks, which have been debunked as recently as a couple of months ago by the Eckhart study. And then we saw that demonization go forward with the allegations against UNRWA by Israel, so many of which have still to this date not been substantiated with credible evidence. And yes, why is UNRWA being attacked? UNRWA, I hate to say it, but UNRWA is being attacked again because it keeps Palestine refugees alive, and with it, the hope of a future Palestinian state. It's as simple as that. We've seen other aid agencies come in, so-called agencies like the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which ended up killing, along with the Israeli military, up to 3,000 Palestine refugees. And now we're seeing Israel use the same tactics it did with Israel, calling out INGOs as being too connected with Hamas, quote unquote, which are all false allegations, just like the ones against UNRWA, and then barring 37 INGOs from operating in Gaza. UNRWA's 12,000 staff, because they're Palestinian, because they're from Gaza, are still on the ground doing work that ideally would be done in concert with all of these INGOs, because the work is never ending.
Well, and one of the things that I wanted to ask in relationship to this in terms of UNRWA's work is where are we in terms of the humanitarian situation, particularly in Gaza? I mean, obviously there's a war of words in the media about this, but you all are on the ground in probably every capacity working in a humanitarian way. So where are we now in this moment as it concerns the humanitarian situation?
Yeah, very good question, because, with all of the theatrics we've seen at Davos and elsewhere over this last week, Greenland and Venezuela, Gaza has not been as much in the news, and the humanitarian crisis, man-made crisis, is ongoing. We know of 72,000 deaths. We know that the actual death toll is much higher by many studies, whether those people are buried under the rubble or were obliterated upon impact because of the firepower that's assaulted Gaza. We have 1.6 million people, about 70% of the population still at risk for acute malnutrition, hunger. This includes 100,000 women who are either nursing or have just given birth. We are also talking about something that's not reported on as much as it should be, but the bifurcation of Gaza into essentially two zones: a yellow zone dividing the green zone controlled by the Israeli military, which is 53% of the land of Gaza, and then the red zone, which is 90% of the population, who are still suffering. And we see that yellow line being encroached on every day. Since the ceasefire, as you had mentioned, Eugene, there's been, hardly can call it a ceasefire, there's been over 400 Palestinians killed since the so-called ceasefire. So the conditions are extremely grave: flooding, we have had children dying of hypothermia over the last couple of days, all avoidable deaths. And now, again, hunger is a key issue because these aid agencies aren't being allowed to do their work. And to this day, although 12,000 UNRWA staff are on the ground, providing medical appointments, providing clean water, clearing waste, and educating 60,000 young people a week, we have seen the Israeli authorities still not let enough humanitarian aid in, including thousands of trucks of UN aid, and they're letting commercial trucks in, which are, costly aid that only certain people can afford. So it is ongoing and extremely atrocious man-made catastrophe. It doesn't have to be this way.
So, the Israelis are attacking a UN agency that is operating under an international mandate, right? Yet, as you were alluding to earlier, Western governments don't just continue to fund Israel, which they do, but in many cases, they're defunding UNRWA. I'm curious, what responsibilities do states have right now? And what happens if the international community allows this assault on humanitarian aid to continue unchecked? And I kind of want to also put in there, we hear this talk of Trump's, Gaza peace board, almost trying to take over so that the UN sort of becomes, I don't know if obsolete. I'm not sure how you see that, but I'm just curious, how you see that in relation to the sort of dismantling of organizations like UNRWA.
Yeah, well, when these allegations came out, and again, there's now been 4 independent investigations, one of them by the U.S. government entity itself, which say that there is no truth at all to any sort of infiltration of Hamas and UNRWA, and yet these allegations continue, and yet the defunding of UNRWA continues by the U.S. Honestly, the U.S. Was the major funder of UNRWA for 75 years, to the tune of some $400,000 a year. And that, at the time, before what experts know to be a genocide, this was a quarter to a third of the entire budget. So really, the U.S. dropping out has been devastating. And all of the other countries that dropped out momentarily, nearly all of them came back in except for the U.S., and some have reduced their funding since, but all of them came back except for the U.S. Again, though, the U.S. is the primary and has been the primary funder of an organization, again, that nobody wants to stay around. We want Palestinians, like any other people on earth, to be in control of their own self-determination, to have a country that they have full control over. Then with peace, then UNRWA is no longer needed. But again, this sets a dangerous, dangerous precedent where international law is ignored. A UN building is destroyed by a fellow UN member state. If this is happening now here, it could happen anywhere. We all need to understand how unprecedented this is and what a grave attack it is on unilateralism, on international law, on the United Nations as a whole. And I'm not here to speculate on the politics, but one wonders about the future of this institution, given this and other things that you cited.
Mm-hmm. Well, one aspect of it that I've been noting is, pretty consistently when you read the polls, and I've just read the most recent Economist YouGov poll, there's strong support by people in the United States for increasing aid to the Palestinian people. And I know that UNRWA USA National Committee, you all are focused on continuing pushing that forward. So for people who might be watching this, might be horrified and thinking, is there something they can do to help, humanitarian relief in Palestine overall? What can you suggest for them?
Yeah, I want to tell you that the American people are incredibly compassionate and generous. And while the US stepped down in its moral duty, the American people stepped up. In October of 2023, we had 7,000 donors. We were bringing in about $4 million in revenue. Now we have 200,000 donors, and we just sent just south of $30 million to the field. So we are never going to fill the gap that the US government made, but the American people are stepping up. And again, their contributions on average about $280 per person. We're talking Bernie Sanders contributions. These are going to make Gaza livable, to provide education, healthcare, to keep people alive and maintain their hope in what are some of the most dire conditions anyone is facing around the world today.
Mm-hmm. Well, we really appreciate you being willing to join us. Mark Kronenfeld with UNRWA USA National Committee. Thanks so much for being with us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you. I appreciate it.